So, Rebel Without a Cause.
What's the matter? What's the matter? Well, what are you waiting on, Toreador? I thought you wanted a little action.
The quintessential teen movie. Made before the teen movie was even a thing. It's unique for a number of reasons, such as being released right after its star, James Dean, died in a sudden car crash, and then its two other stars, Natalie Wood and Saul Mineo, later died quite suspiciously at young ages. But what really made Rebel unique was that it applied the tones and conventions of a 1950s melodrama to a cast full of young adults. Essentially, it was a movie about teenagers, while also attracting other demographics. Rebel deals with three troubled teenagers. Jim Stark is the new kid in town, having had to move many times because of his own difficult behaviour. He lives in a semi-abusive household with a timid father who's afraid to stand up to his henpecking wife.
You're tearing me apart!
Judy is a girl who's on the verge of becoming a woman, and her father has noticed. Uncomfortable with showing her affection now that she no longer looks like a child,
What's the matter with you? You're getting too old for that kind of stuff, kiddo.
this causes her to act out by hanging out with other delinquents. And finally we have John, nicknamed Plato, who has been abandoned by his parents.
Seems like she's always going away somewhere. She's got a sister in Chicago and she's going there for the holiday.
But where's your father?
Well, they're not together, sir.
And he's developed the questionable habit of shooting puppies for fun.
Can you tell me why you killed those puppies, Plato?
No, sir.
Oh, and he's probably gay.
It's Mom.
It was this characterization that made the film so great at the time. Teenagers rarely got this kind of focus in a mainstream film. If they were in films, they were usually shown as one-dimensional delinquents without that much character depth. There was, however, one film from the 1930s that I think Rebel took a few cues from.
You say you gotta send us to jail to keep us off the streets. Well, that's a lie. You're sending us to jail because you don't want to see us. You want to forget us.
Wild Boys of the Road was a gritty drama made slap bang in the middle of the Great Depression. The plot dealt with teenagers who had their lives disrupted by the Depression and travelled all around the country looking for work. It also pulled no punches on criticising society.
Jail can't be any worse than the street.
Here the teen delinquents are shown to have been made this way because of a society that would rather ignore them than help them. But Wild Boys of the Road may have had an easy scapegoat for explaining why the teens are the way they are. After all, it was the Depression, so everyone had issues then. Once the Depression and World War II were okay, everyone should be fine, right?
You're tearing me apart!
When it comes to teenagers, society always looks at them like a bomb that's about to go off. In the 2000s, video games were going to turn us all into violent psychopaths. Before that, television was going to rot our brains. My mother's favourite expression was, "You'll get square eyes if you watch too much TV." Going back even further, people believed that reading for fun actually gave you brain fever. Every generation's old people always worries about what horrors the young will inflict on society, and it was the post-war years that gave rise to the term juvenile delinquent. The late 40s and 50s saw huge changes in the traditional structures of family values. While the men were away fighting overseas in the war, the women were at home working. This caused a massive change to the traditional image of the father as the breadwinner, the mother as the housewife, and happy, obedient children ready to be raised whatever gender role society picked out for them. Rebel Without a Cause references this as well. Jim's worried because his father has taken on a domestic role.
Hi, Jimbo. You thought I was Mom?
Plato's family structure has pretty much fallen apart as he's left in the care of his housekeeper. Judy's family has the closest to a traditional structure, but even that's implied to be more the image of normality. 1950s values saw people trying to return to what they thought was normal, but the damage had been done by the war, and there was still the fear of communism and nuclear attack. In addition to that, the 1950s saw the rise of civil rights, and of course teenage rebellion. So naturally, this led to conservative middle-class adults panicking that it would cause the collapse of society as they knew it.
You think the end of the world will come at nighttime?
At dawn.
The movie industry responded to this change in a very dissonant way, by both making films about the crazy teens and also marketing to them as a demographic. And it's from this period that we saw the forerunners of what would eventually become the young adult genre.
You know why.
The 50s saw a string of movies about teenage delinquents that were both marketed to teens and also preying on adults' fears about the rebellion.
Where do you want it? You want it in the belly? How about in the face, huh?
Blackboard Jungle is a great example of this. It caused a scandal for showing the horrors that happened in inner city schools, while also marketing to teens with the song
1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock. 5, 6,
Okay, that's enough of that.
You've been having yourself a time, huh, Johnny?
The Wild One likewise was inspired by a real-life riot in 1947, while also marketing itself around Marlon Brando's rebellious image. Both those films confined the teen rebellions to remote small towns or the inner city. Rebel Without a Cause, meanwhile, takes place in a normal suburban area, and the protagonists are all middle class, showing that teenage rebellion is not just tied to wealth or location. The Blackboard Jungle is from the perspective of the teacher trying to save these troubled students, while The Wild One treats the main character's edginess as a facade that needs to be beaten out of him. Rebel Without a Cause, meanwhile, subtly criticises that attitude. The key is in the title. These rebels don't have a cause.
Don't I buy everything you want? A bicycle? You get a bicycle. A car? You buy me many things. No.
They're all provided for and they live in a nice middle-class town. The police chief is even a reasonable authority figure.
Even if you just want to talk, come on in and shoot the breeze. It's easier sometimes than talking to your folks.
So they really have nothing to rebel against. But of course they still do it.
You know, it was very dangerous. But it was a matter of honor.
In this film, the problems are all individual rather than caused by society. Judy has the most functional family unit out of the three leads. Both parents are happily married and she has a little brother that she cares for. But even this ideal family unit has its problems. Judy is becoming a woman and it's affecting her relationship with her father.
Maybe he doesn't mean it, but he acts like he does.
He won't kiss her anymore or show her any affection because she no longer looks like a child. And he also attacks her for wearing makeup.
He grabbed my face. He started rubbing off all the lipstick.
Judy later draws a parallel between her father and the boy she dates.
All the time I've been looking for someone to love me, and now I love somebody.
Her attraction to Jim is born out of him being loving and caring, which her father isn't.
But a man who can be gentle and sweet, like you are.
Judy is sadly the least important of the three leads, so the film doesn't go as deep as it could have with her. But addressing a girl's growing sexuality is pretty impressive for a film from the 1950s.
You live here, don't you?
Who lives?
Speaking of sexuality, Plato is definitely gay, or at least bi-curious.
And fishing. I want him to teach me how because I know he won't get mad if I goof.
And what's interesting about him is that he parallels Judy in a lot of ways.
The people he really likes lets them call him Jamie.
Jamie?
It's said that he wants a father figure, and in the scenes in the castle, Judy and Jim act as surrogate parents to him. But there's still a clear attraction to Jim.
Come on, let's go.
Director Nicholas Ray had experienced something similar where his second wife left him for his 13-year-old son. So this incest subtext was brought on by his own feelings of guilt that he couldn't mend his relationship with his son.
It's hard to make friends with these guys.
I don't want to make friends.
Plato is easily the most tragic of the three leads, which is interesting because he's also the most violent. Judy and Jim are brought to the police station at the start for relatively minor offences. Plato is brought in for shooting puppies with a gun he stole from his parents' room, and he eventually becomes the film's antagonist in the last act. The film doesn't show him as a one-dimensional evil antagonist with a gun.
I don't think it's right for a mother to go away and leave her child on his birthday. It's his birthday today, sir.
And that has resulted in massive abandonment issues. The film doesn't excuse his behaviour, but it acknowledges that there are complicated reasons for it.
Do you know if the boy ever talked to a psychiatrist?
Oh, Mrs. Crawford don't believe in them, sir.
The film doesn't scapegoat society for making him the way he is, or show this as a rebellion that needs to be beaten out of him. He has a clear reason for why he is the way he is, and it acts as a cautionary tale for the audience. The film spells it out that if his parents had shown him more love or affection, then he might not have turned out this way. It's even because his parents aren't around that he gets a hold of the gun in the first place.
Where'd you get the gun?
My mother's drawer.
The movie avoids dividing the characters into the good delinquents who are just misunderstood and the bad delinquents who need to be punished by giving Plato these sympathetic qualities and presenting his death tragically.
This poor baby got nobody. Just nobody.
So now we have Jim.
He was always a lovely boy.
Grandmother, you tell one more lie, and you're going to turn to stone.
You'd expect from the marketing and pop culture that he'd be the same rebellious hooligan that Marlon Brando played in The Wild One, but...
Mom, I want to do something right!
Like Plato, Jim is a good boy at heart. He's got issues, sure, but he's a good guy.
I have never done anything right. I've been going around with my head in a sling for years.
His troubles come from two parents who are afraid to communicate. His mother's go-to solution for whenever something bad happens is to leave town rather than facing the problems.
Well, it doesn't matter anyway because we're moving.
His father, meanwhile, is abused by his wife and isn't able to be a strong role model for his son.
Dad, stand up for me.
Throughout the film, Jim wonders how he can be a man if he has no good examples to follow.
What can you do when you have to be a man?
Well, now... No, you give me a direct answer.
And to the movie's credit, it doesn't demonize the parents either. They're shown to be people, real and flawed, just like their children. They don't always have the answers, and they won't always be there. Even Ray, the good cop and reasonable authority figure, is missing at a crucial time when Jim needs him. A major theme of the film is the teens realizing that adults don't always have all the answers, and the teens need to figure things out for themselves. Because that's what growing up is all about.
I think that you can't just go around proving things and pretending like you're tough.
What makes Rebel ahead of other teen-focused media like, say, Gossip Girl is that the parents are shown to be realistic, flawed people rather than one-dimensional antagonists or just useless. They're real, flawed people who are able to learn and grow.
You read about things like this happening to other families, but you never dream it could happen to yours.
The separation of reality from imagination is another important theme of the film. The teenage characters each learn that real life is complicated and this image of stable perfection doesn't exist. Even the gang members seem to be more about preserving the image of being rebellious. They only pop one of Jim's tires, keep the knife fight tame, and the game of chicken is meant to be safe enough. Their gang is more like a game instead of an actual rebellion.
I like you. You know that? Why do we do this? You gotta do something.
And when Buzz is killed, they're forced to confront the reality of the situation.
A kid was killed tonight!
Jim realizes that he has to do the right thing and act like an adult, while the others try to stop him from telling the police, desperate to preserve the game they can no longer play. Jim, Judy, and Plato later play their own game in the castle, where they pretend to be a perfect family.
You see, we're newlyweds.
Yes. Oh, there's just one thing. What about...
Children? If you lock them in, you'll never have to see them again. Much less talk to them.
Talk to them, heavens.
Nobody talks to children.
No, they just tell them.
But again, they're forced to face reality when Buzz's friends find them. This theme is introduced with the class trip to the planetarium, where the teens learn all about the solar system. In the course of this scene, the teens are told that the planet they're on is just one tiny part of a much larger cosmos. The world will end one day, and when it does, they'll barely be missed.
In all the immensity of our universe and the galaxies beyond, the Earth will not be missed.
And that ties into the conflicts that each of these characters face. What's the point in finding a purpose if it's all going to be washed away one day? You'll grow up, get a good job, get married, raise a family. Then one day the world will end and no one will care.
And man, existing alone, seems himself an episode of little consequence. That's all.
So, Rebel is the unique creature known as a movie for teenagers that doesn't patronize them or pander to them. It talks about some very real issues like generation gaps, growing up in a dysfunctional environment, existential angst, sexual awakening, and why some people turn to violence. It has the kind of character depth that you really didn't see in teenagers until the John Hughes movies of the 80s.
You believe this? Huh?
And that's exactly why it stood the test of time, and the issues it tackles weren't too different from what 1950s teenagers actually had to face. When it comes to the James Dean performances, East of Eden will always be my favourite, but I have to admit, it's still a pretty close contest.
I said, now, boy, this is going to be one terrific day, so you better live it up. Because tomorrow you'll be nothing.
And we may now resume.